Welcome to Dot Point PS8, and today we're looking at discussing strategies that are available to farmers to market farm products, including vertical integration, contract selling, direct marketing, cooperatives, and marketing boards. So because this is an including dot point, you need to know about each of these things by name because you can and have in the past been asked about these things by name. So it's important you know about every one of them. So first of all, what marketing is. Marketing basically involves every aspect of the production, from deciding what animals you want to breed, with what traits, how you're going to raise them, and then also what's going to happen with it and who will buy and who will consume the product. So that marketing involves every step along the way. So we've got 4 examples here, which we're going to talk about in a bit of detail in a second. So number 1 is vertical integration. So vertical integration is where there's one company that owns more than one level of the production chain. So an example is they might own the grazing farms, the feedlot farm, they might own an abattoir, they might own the transport. And a good example of this is Steggles in chicken, as I wrote down here, where they own the hatchery, the growing farms, the feed mills, the abattoir, the processing plants, and the transport. So Steggles is a good example, and chicken is very vertically integrated. But obviously we're doing beef. So the example I've given you here is Craig Cook's Prime Quality Meats, which you can see the logo here. If you go onto their website, you'll notice that they own farms, and they also have butchers in supermarkets and shopping centres. So around Sydney, example in St Ives. And basically the aim of this, of having owning multiple steps, is it gives one company more control over how they produce things. It helps minimize waste, and it helps reduce costs between each step because there's only one company making a profit. So for example, Craig Cook's Prime Quality Meats, they can know if their consumers want something like an increased marbling score, then they can just simply change the production on their farms very easily and very quickly to make that happen. So they have much more control over the process. So it'd be good for you to write advantages and disadvantages here. Basically, the advantages are what I've already mentioned, that they have much more control, and then it ends up being cheaper for the consumer as well. When there's vertical integration, the operations usually become more efficient, and they are cheaper. They produce chicken, for example, cheaper for the consumer. Disadvantages are that the companies need to own all of the areas or need to own multiple steps, and they obviously need to have a fair bit of capital or money to be able to buy or control each of those steps. So the capital involved and also then the risk involved in owning multiple steps increases. So that's a disadvantage there. Contract selling is where 2 parties might have a written agreement, which is a legally binding agreement with each other. So Woolies, for example, or Coles might have a contract with various beef producers to produce a certain number of animals at a certain date for a certain price. And they will agree on the price, agree on the specifications, and they'll also usually describe in the contract any penalties. So if they don't meet the deadline, or they aren't as fat, or the muscle score isn't as high as they wanted it to be, there'll be financial penalties involved. So an example here is Coles and Woolies, as I said, specifying these things. The contract would also have a given date and agreed cents per kilo and financial penalties. And the advantage for the producer is that they know how much they're going to get, and they can kind of make decisions and plan ahead of time of how much money they'll make, how much they'll sell, and therefore what they can buy in terms of machinery and also inputs and stuff like that. Also, a guaranteed price is nice in terms of borrowing money. They can borrow more money with a bank if they know that they're going to get a certain income. On the disadvantages side, if the market price goes up and you still have to sell your product at the lower price because that is the contract. And then if you don't meet the contract, you don't meet the marbling score, you don't meet the fat depth, etc., then you're going to get penalized because of your contract. So that's a disadvantage there. Direct marketing, again, we can use the example of Craig Cook's Prime Quality Meats again here because they also have direct marketing. So they have a website, and because they have a farm and they also have a website where they sell their meat, this means that the one company is actually direct marketing to the end consumer. It means they're selling, the people who grow it are selling directly to the consumer who eats it. And it's cutting out all those steps in between, like the supermarket, the abattoir, the feedlot. It is just the person who sells it to the person who eats it. And that's called direct marketing. And usually that can happen these days via the internet, which makes it much more possible. And people can buy stuff on their website. And the example, as I said, is Craig Cook's Prime Quality Meats, who have online sales via their website. And so the advantage is that Craig Cook's makes a lot more money out of it because they don't have to pay all these middlemen in the way, such as the supermarkets, etc. So that's good for them, and they can control the whole process and how consumers see and how they get it and the quality they get it in. Disadvantages are they have to spend a lot more time and effort and money in promoting the information, promoting the product. So they have to have a website, they have to maintain it, they have to then organize the transport and all those kind of things that normally supermarkets or someone else would do for them. They have to do it themselves. So that is a disadvantage. Cooperatives. Now, there's not many examples with beef, but one example, it's much more common in dairy, by the way. Dairy Farmers is an example, and you would know Dairy Farmers Milk, but Dairy Farmers is a cooperative, and literally it just means businesses cooperating with each other. So you might have in one area, the example I've given you here for beef is the Northern Cooperative Meat Company, and in northern New South Wales, there's a whole pile of beef producers in the same kind of area that decided they would get together and put in money together to buy an abattoir and to pay for processing in an abattoir, also pay for marketing and advertisements on TV. And so instead of all these individual little farms that are making beef competing against each other, they couldn't afford to have their own abattoir. They couldn't afford to market their own stuff on TV. They decided to make a cooperative where they're cooperating together because they're selling the same thing. So they can go in together, they own shares in the cooperative, and any money that the cooperative makes goes back to the farmers instead of back to someone else who owns it in shares and stuff like that. It's the businesses, the farmers that own the cooperative, and they make all the money from the cooperative. And so it involves multiple producers in the same industry setting up a business to process, advertise, and market their produce. And it helps them compete against really large businesses, such as really large dairy businesses or other beef producers that are really large. It helps small producers compete against bigger ones. And so the producers are part owners in the business and they share in the capital expenditure. So advantages, as I've already said, is that they can compete. Smaller beef producers can compete against really large businesses, and they can then afford to buy things that are expensive, such as processing equipment, abattoirs, spend money on TV ads, etc. Disadvantages are they're going to not have a say as much as if they were doing it themselves. They're going to have to agree with all the other people in the cooperative, and then if things don't go well, the cooperative might fall apart. The last thing here is marketing boards, and basically they're set up usually by government initially, but they're there to benefit an entire industry. So with the one for beef is called MLA, or Meat and Livestock Australia, and every time a person who is growing beef cattle sells cattle, they have to send money to MLA per head. So they send a dollar, I think it's a couple of dollars per animal that they sell every time they sell a beef cow or beef cattle, beef animal, and they will send those couple of dollars. They'll be charged their fee, their duty, their levy at the end of the month or the end of the year, and MLA will then do advertising and do research for beef for the benefit of all beef producers. And so basically they're a board that are responsible for promoting and sourcing markets for Australian produce, particularly overseas. And so the example is Meat and Livestock Australia. Their government created initially, but the government doesn't control it any longer, but the government does help giving money to it. And so there's many things that they do, including research, but also all red meat advertising in Australia and overseas is done through MLA, and they're responsible for finding and developing international markets. Now, the advantage is that all these beef producers aren't competing against each other for doing this. The MLA will do it for them. So the MLA looks after marketing of beef, advertising on TV in Australia, also finding overseas markets. The disadvantages are that basically the producers have to pay the levy to MLA. They don't have a choice. They're forced to pay that money. So in terms of past questions, you can see here, outline one way the farmer could sell their product, and the answer is direct marketing here that I've given. I've underlined it to make it really clear for the market, and then I've talked clearly about it. Discuss strategies, and this is strategies with an S, available to farmers to market their farm products. So I've talked about vertical integration and cooperatives. I've given plus and minus really clearly. You can see here, I'd like to see you doing this, giving plus and minuses really clearly so the marker can see straight away that you have pluses and minuses for a discuss. And I've underlined my two things so it's clear that I have strategies, and the marker knows straight away this is a good answer. And you can see from reading it that I've given a comprehensive discussion of both of them rather than just outlining it. I've really comprehensively given a lot of information there, naming examples, really specific examples, which is where it gets to be comprehensive. The company's website describes a business owning grain farms, feed mills, hatcheries, broiler and breeder farms and processing plants. This is exactly an example of vertical integration. This is similar to the question I've done up here, and I've in fact just copied it. It's the same type of question. And this next one here, 2015, provide points for and against contract selling. So it clearly says and. If you only do 4, you are only going to get 2 marks. So I've given plus, plus, negative, negative, for and against really clearly. It's clear that I've talked about both there, and I've provided detailed points and for 4 marks there. The last question here is what are the benefits of vertical integration? So you can see that specific things are being asked in this dot point about that were in the dot point. So any of the 5 things could be asked in the production and marketing. So I've clearly done here marketing, and then I've done production, and I've made it really clear for the markers that I have both because they will be looking for both. And I've given vertical integration here, underline, and then talked about what it is, and then I've given clear effects or benefits here to give 2 benefits of vertical integration using an example.